Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. Today's request comes to us from patron ASDFJKLSC, who has once again asked me to pick my own subject. And so long as I'm playing The Witcher 3, I'll be using every such opportunity to pick the next entry in the Witcher book series. Today, that means I'm looking at The Sword of Destiny, the second short story collection, and the lead-in to the novels. And since I've already looked at the book's author, let's skip straight on to Part 2. The Review. The Sword of Destiny collects 6 short stories, all of which take place chronologically after the ones in The Last Wish. The first story is The Bounds of Reason, in which Geralt joins up with several other groups who want to kill a wounded dragon and take its treasure hoard. This group includes the dwarf Yarpen Zigrin and his crew, 3 professional draconid hunters called the Reavers, a guy who calls himself 3 jackdaws after his heraldry symbol, and his 2 female Zerrikanian bodyguards, Dandelion and Yennefer. Yennefer and Geralt bicker for most of the trip since Geralt up and left her in the middle of the night a few years ago, but over time they rekindle their romance. When they reach the dragon, it turns out that she died of her wounds. But her child is still alive, and 3 jackdaws takes his natural form of a gold dragon to defend it. He defeats a few of the dragon hunters to make his point, and when a group of peasants show up to attack, Geralt and Yennefer defend him. After that, everyone left alive departs in peace. The second story is A Shard of Ice. Geralt and Yennefer are together again, and Geralt is taking disgusting jobs like killing a Zeugl in a trash heap because Yennefer wanted to go to a small town named Edwin Vale, which got its name from the elven ruins it was built on. The reason she came here is to meet with an elven lover of hers named Istrid, and even though he and Geralt both knew that Yennefer wasn't the sort of woman to tie herself to one man, they hate each other's existence and challenge each other to a duel. Yennefer doesn't want either of them to die, and so in the end, she sends both of them magical raven messengers to break up with them. The third story is Eternal Flame. It introduces the metropolis of Novigrad, which is the biggest city in the north, with a population of over 30,000 people. It's also where a lot of Dopplers and Mimics live, since they lived in the area before humans showed up and can shift their appearances and personalities to match the people they observe. One such mimic has taken the identity of a halfling merchant named Dainty Bibervelt, and while Dainty is initially angry at being mugged and having his identity stolen, he eventually discovers that the mimic, who goes by the name Dudu, is actually a better businessman than he is. However, the mimic still almost gets caught by Chappelle, the Minister of Security and minion of the Hierarch of the Eternal Flame. But it turns out that Chappelle is also secretly a mimic, and so he covers for him. As for Geralt, he's fine with all of this, because it turns out mimics are inherently nicer people than most other humanoids. Story 4 is A Little Sacrifice. Geralt is acting as a translator between a mermaid and a duke who are in love with each other, but their relationship isn't going so well because both of them expect the other to give up their life above or under the sea to live together. While he's there, Geralt meets a female bard named Essie, and while she swiftly falls in love with him, he doesn't return her feelings. Eventually, though, Geralt gives in and shares a single night of passion with Essie, but he never sees her again. Meanwhile, the mermaid finally compromises and gets a sea witch to change her fins into legs. She doesn't have to sacrifice her voice, but Dandelion makes up for this by writing the tragic Hans Christian Andersen version afterwards. Story 5 is the title story, Sword of Destiny. Geralt gets hired to deliver an ultimatum to the Dryads of Brokilon, fey creatures who protect their forest from human encroachment by killing any man who tries to enter, and by taking in abandoned girls and using what's effectively magical brainwashing to turn them into more Dryads. While there, Geralt meets a spoiled little girl named Ciri who ran away from a betrothal meeting because she didn't like her intended husband. During his stay, Geralt realizes that Ciri is the child who was promised to him by Duny and Pavetta, and her destiny is so strong that when she drinks the brainwashing water, it has no effect on her. And although Geralt has an opportunity to run away with Ciri and take her in as a Witcher, he refuses his destiny and sends her back to her grandmother. The sixth story is called Something More, and it's not really a single story so much as a bunch of little stories that help set up the novels. As such, I'll just list a few facts that the story gives us. First, Geralt is the son of a sorceress, something which is incredibly rare since most sorceresses are infertile, thanks to the magical changes they make to their bodies. Second, Geralt met with Queen Calanthe 6 years after the Dooney incident, but refused to take Ciri with him then either. Third, Ciri's parents both died at sea when a storm destroyed their ship. Fourth, a new empire in the south called Nilfgaard invaded Cintra and massacred the capital city, killing Queen Calanthe in the process. Fifth, Nilfgaard was stopped from advancing further north at the Battle of Sodden Hill, where 14 spellcasters lost their lives, including Triss Merigold, but not Yennefer of Vengerberg. Sixth, the Witcher trials kill 9 out of every 10 boys they take in. As such, while they regularly invoke the Law of Surprise, most Witchers are actually just orphans, bastards, and unwanted children. The reason they invoke the Law of Surprise is in the hope that one day they might actually get a child from doing so, and since that child is destined to be a Witcher, they won't have to go through all the mutations and deadly trials. Finally, Geralt saves a farmer from ghouls and invokes the Law of Surprise again, and it turns out that while the farmer was away, his wife found Ciri hiding in the woods and took her in, making her a child surprise twice over. And since Ciri now has no other home to go to, Geralt finally decides to accept his fate. The analysis. So once again, most of the stories are based directly on real-life folktales. The Little Mermaid is obviously the basis for A Little Sacrifice. The Bounds of Reason is based on a Polish legend about the founding of Krakow, and A Shard of Ice is based on another Hans Christian Andersen story called The Snow Queen. It's the same story that Disney's Frozen is a take on. However, in these later stories, Sapkowski's characters and setting lore are starting to take over from the fairy tale parodies. While the Little Mermaid parody plays a role in A Little Sacrifice, the story is mostly about Geralt and Essie. And while A Shard of Ice mentions a legend about a Snow Queen, the only Snow Queen in the story is Yennefer. And incidentally, that story is the last we hear from her until the novels begin. What I personally get from this is that Sapkowski is slowly growing more confident in his skill as an author, and so he's relying less on reinterpreting other stories and more on developing his own. He's still borrowing some ideas and monsters from fairy tales and Dungeons & Dragons, but now he's also borrowing themes from the old stories, and having his original characters play them out. The story of impossible love and sacrifice doesn't play out between the Duke and the Mermaid, it plays out between Geralt and Essie. And just like how Shards of Ice and the Snow Queen cause people to see the worst in others, Geralt and Istrid see the worst in each other for no reason except that they both love the same woman. In the last couple of stories, it's fairly clear that Sapkowski has finished his world building and is transitioning to the completely original story he wants to tell in his novels. As such, both stories share the theme of destiny, and how it has a way of seeking you out if you try to deny it. Ciri has an almost supernatural affinity with Geralt that allows him to get her under control surprisingly quickly. And when they both leave the forest of Brokilon, she actively wants to go with him instead of going back to Cintra. It's also heavily implied that the reason her parents died and then Cintra got massacred is because Geralt didn't take her with him when he could have. And from what we learn later on, events probably would have played out differently if he had. And then, just to hammer the point home, Destiny has Ciri become a child surprise a second time, just to make sure Geralt understands that no, this isn't all a coincidence. Ciri is going to be an important person, and Geralt is going to play an important role in her life, whether he likes it or not. It honestly reads like an allegory for parenthood. Because of something Geralt did, something he didn't entirely think out, he now has a responsibility he doesn't want. He tries to get out of that responsibility multiple times, but each time he does so, things keep getting worse. Worse for himself, worse for the child, and worse for the world as a whole. It's only when he owns up to his obligation that things start to turn around. But as for where the story goes next, well, that's where the novels pick up. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.